Thank you so much, Bob. When I told him we were on the way to the hotel, I said, now, be prepared. We look like we're the Beverly Hillbillies, so, one danger of driving. Anyway, hi. My name is Trish, and I am an alcoholic. I'm a member of the Spiritual Principles Group in Davie, Florida, and my sobriety date is May the 7th, 1988. And it is such an honor to be here today. I've got to tell you, this is amazing. And the most amazing part of it is looking out and knowing that at least a third of the people I'm seeing are people I know, and they're here loving me and wishing me good, and, yay, Spiritual Principles are here, and the Davie Women's Group's here, and, that's just cool. I mean, with all those good vibes coming my way, I got this, God's got this. Because I got anxious. I was added kind of at the last minute when one of the speakers canceled, and they were like, oh my gosh, and said, Trish, would you do it? And I said, of course. Of course. And then it came time for it. Yep, a lot of 7-step prayer today, so that's where we are. I am, like so many people I've heard, just blown away by the speakers I've heard so far. I mean, are you amazed with Paulette and Jimmy? Were they amazing speakers? Wow. Powerful stories, and if you missed them, I really encourage you to listen to the tapes or do what you can to get to hear them, because they were just great, powerful, uplifting, energizing AA stories. And I'm really grateful to the committee for inviting me to do this, even though I'm anxious. I really am. Thank you. What an honor. And it's just. How cool is it to go to a convention and know the people up on the podium, How cool is it to go to the convention and you just see friends like Michael, who read today. He was the first person who greeted me, really, when I moved to Fort Lauderdale. And the way that I got my first home group in Fort Lauderdale, I was living on the east side, and we went to a meeting, and this woman named Sandy was speaking. And she was talking about how her home group, Oakland Park, was the best group in AA. And I thought, that's where I got to go. Anybody who says that about their home group, I got to check that out. And I went there, and they were having a business meeting. And what I did, they said, we need somebody to make coffee next month. And I said, me. Because what I've learned, I've moved a lot in sobriety. And what I've learned is you don't wait to be asked. You're the new guy on the block, step up. So I did. And the first week I was making coffee, Michael showed up to be there and help me, and he took me out to dinner, and I'm just like, what a gracious guy. I mean, I can't see because of the lights now, so I don't know where you're sitting, Michael, but thank you. Thank you. That's the spirit of AA, and that's what I hope we all bring to each other, in welcoming newcomers, because especially living here in South Florida, we get people who move here who are already sober. And when you move someplace and you're already sober, it's totally different than when you move there or getting sober to begin with, and people watch you grow and develop, and they get to see you bloom in front of their eyes, and how exciting is that? But somebody who's already sober shows up, and it's like, who's this bozo? Another bozo on the bus, yeah. But, you need to be welcomed. And so thank you, Broward County, for always, everywhere I've gone, making me welcome when I came back to South Florida. I originally, unlike our first two speakers, I grew up in this lovely home where nobody ever hit anybody except for the kids hitting each other in normal childhood fights. They were Southern Baptists, so I never saw anybody drink. And I thought nobody in my family had ever had a drink. I didn't know. People actually I didn't know anything about it. I was very innocent. Now, when I was in second grade, my best friend was a couple of houses down the road, and her mother was Methodist and her father was Catholic. And he would sit in the front yard and have a beer. So, that's what I knew about drinking. That was for the Catholics. And occasionally, on a hot day, he would let us sit in his lap and have a sip of his beer. And I've heard so many people talk about how they hated it the first time they tasted it. I loved it, man. I thought it tasted good. It was like this, I don't know, I can't describe it, but you know, if you like it, you like it, and if you don't, you don't. But I loved it in second grade. What can I say? And, you know, that didn't start my alcoholic career or anything like that. It was just a real vivid memory, and I liked it. And then I went along, and I went to church camp and dutifully wrote in the front of my Bible, I was like 9 years old, I promised myself and God that I will never touch alcohol. I signed my name, and I dated it, you know. And I didn't keep that promise. Or you'd have a different speaker today. Yeah, no. I was the kind of kid that I would sit there and I forgot to start my timer. I'm sorry, guys. Oh, well, we'll it started now, whatever. I promise, Judy. Anyway, it was, I would sit in church, and like I remember once being at a revival, and there was this woman with this teased up black hair, and a revival is really similar to a meeting in the sense that, you know, people would come and they would say what they were like and what happened and what they're like now. You know, they give in their testimony and blah, blah, blah. So this woman's given her testimony talking about how she used to hang out in the honky-tonks with all the good old boys, and then she found, you know, salvation, and now she didn't do that anymore. And so, I was jealous. I thought, this is not fair. I mean, I'm like in somewhere between 5th and 7th grade, you know, when this happened. And I'm thinking, she got to go out and have a fun time, and now we're both going to go to heaven, but I'll never get to do all that stuff. You know, it's like, how is this fair? I just knew it was unjust. So I rectified that. We moved back to New Orleans. I grew up in South Louisiana, and we moved to a lot of different little towns, but most of my life I lived in New Orleans. And the thing about New Orleans is that once you're tall enough to look over the bar, they serve you. And, you know, so I started drinking in high school there, and it solved everything for me. And, you know, I've heard so many alcoholics talk about this. I am so typical. I just felt that immediate release. The first time I really drank, I was with my sister, my older sister, and this guy she knew who had a Corvette. And he was taking her for a ride, and they let me come along, the little sister, and I sat on that little hump behind the two seats, because in the Corvette, there's not really room for three. So I'm sitting back there, and they're driving down the road, and we have a bottle of Boone's Farm, Strawberry Hill. Woohoo! Child of the 60s, yes indeed. So my first real, you know, buzz was from Boone's Farm. And what happened was we were drinking that bottle of wine, then they let me out so she could go somewhere else with this guy. And I was running down the road, flapping my arms like wings, like, you know, I'm flapping like a butterfly. And I think, you know, isn't this fun? And I'm just feeling happy. Well, they drove by. I felt so stupid because they saw me. And, you know, that was like my story in a nutshell. I would drink, I'd do something that, you know, it may not be the worst thing in the world, but it really made me feel stupid. And then I'd regret it, you know. As time went on, the things I did were not quite as innocent as flapping my arms like wings of a butterfly. You know, I got in trouble with drinking almost from the get-go. I did stupid things, though. They weren't like horrific things, but to me it was life and death. I was always dramatic. And, you know, there I am. In high school, I fell in the bathtub at the English teacher's house at a party because I was drunk. You know, no big deal, but, you know, everybody knew I did it. And he got mad at us all because some people got drunk at his house. Well, of course we did. You know, if there's booze available, kids are going to get drunk, so that's what happened. But he gave everybody in the whole class a D on our next semester. Now, I was going to this high school that was a college prep place where people had never seen a D. So this was like this huge, big deal to everybody, and they knew whose fault it was that he was mad at our class. So I felt very self-conscious about that. The other big big thing that happened in high school. I mean, these are stupid stories, but this is the way it starts. I was out on a date. My boyfriend had broken up with me because I wouldn't sleep with him. At the ripe old age of 15, I wasn't quite ready for sex. Imagine. And so he broke up with me, and this other guy asked me out. And we got drunk. And I sat in the back seat of the car, fully clothed, where we went parking, because that's what kids did in high school. When I was in high school, you go parking. And so we were parking, and the couple in the front seat are doing whatever they're doing. I don't remember, because I was basically in a blackout. And I don't remember this, but I am told that I sat in the back seat going, am I a virgin? Am I still a virgin? I was so humiliated when I was told that story that I had done this, I mean, I was so humiliated that I wanted to get out of town. And I did it. I went ahead and I got into college early, so I went straight from the frying pan into the fire. I was 16, and I went to this school. It was a private school, little college, that was supposed to be associated with the Southern Baptist, so it was going to be all cool and fine. Well, no. They had lots of alcohol there, too. And, right away, I'm just right back in the fire. And, I would feel so self-conscious around people. I would shiver and shake, and, my jaw would clench, and I couldn't talk, and my stomach would just be shivering. And when I would drink, slowly by slowly, those symptoms would go away. So I would go to these fraternity parties and sit there, stand by the keg, and be helpful. I would pump the keg and keep sticking my glass under the spigot. And I would stay and do that and be helpful until I could talk. And then once I could talk, I could go and I could dance and I could do this and, just have a wonderful grand old time. The problem is that I never knew where that cutoff line was, ever. I know there are lots of people who had a period of social drinking. I never did. It was always, you have one drink and you need to have the next one. I always had that craving and obsession with drinking. And who can say why that happens with some people and not others? We don't know. Biology. I was just born to be an alcoholic. I was just waiting for them to add the alcohol. And what happened was what happens to a lot of girls. I passed out in a fraternity house. I shouldn't say a lot of girls, but you hear about it. And, girls will pass out in a fraternity house, and then you hear the stories. And that's what happened to me. And exactly what you hear in those stories is exactly what happened. And it was horrible, I don't really hardly remember it. There are little pieces of the brownout where you come to, and it's like, oh my God, who are you, and what's happening? And after that happened, though, I was really suicidal and very depressed, and I just couldn't look at anybody in the eye. I felt so dirty and horrible, and it never occurred to me to call that rape. Nowadays they've got all these committees and things, and everybody's so, aware of these things and what happens on college campuses with alcohol. But back then, it was just in my mind, and I'm sure if anybody had asked anybody on campus about it, in their mind too, it would have been my fault. I mean, I went to this fraternity house and passed out. What did I think was going to happen? But I didn't choose to pass out. It's just the way it was. But after that, I felt like I was so horrible and so despicable and, untouchable, and I had lost the right to say no. And, I would just walk around campus and just practice looking down and not stepping on any cracks, because that's all I could do. And that's how I survived. And, it's just sad. I went back there years later. They asked me actually to come and be on a leadership council at this school, because I'd had some success professionally, and, how it goes. They want alumni with, reputation or whatever. And I went back and I was on this leadership council, and they were talking about, alcohol education on campus. And I said, well, what are you doing about that? And they said, well, these kids they're not, no, they didn't even say kids. They said, these are young adults. They are not kids. And I beg to differ. I think, and that's one reason I love that AA carries the message It's about attraction, not promotion, but especially when we're invited to college campuses to go and talk, what a service to let people that age know about alcoholism and what may be the matter. Because I had no freaking clue. No clue. I don't even know if I'd ever heard of an alcoholic at that point. Anyway, I got through, and actually with really good grades. It's like, how does that happen? I don't know, but I did. And at the end, I actually even had like my first real boyfriend, and life seemed pretty good. And I look back on it, and when I met him, and for that first semester we were together, which was my last semester there at college, we were really poor, and we didn't drink. And I was playing tennis X number of days a week and taking ballet and, riding my bicycle everywhere I went. And, just outsides looked great. And for years and years and years, I tried to get back to this golden period of my life, get the right diet or the right boyfriend or the right exercise. And it never occurred to me it's the not drinking, It was the not drinking that let this be this golden period of my life. But that, I didn't know yet, and you don't know what you don't know. I went on to graduate school after that, actually law school, and did really well there too. I'm the kind of alcoholic who falls uphill, and I'm drinking. I went out drinking all night the night before I took the LSATs, the test that you take to go to law school, and went and took the test hungover, and I did well on it because I take tests well, and then I did well in school, law review and all this kind of stuff. And I got a job with like the third largest firm in the state and blah, 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 blah. And I was like the third woman they had hired. So big deal, at the time it was a big deal. And I was successful, and I went on and practiced at a couple of firms. And by the time I was 30, I was a partner in a really big law firm down here in South Florida, and very prestigious firm. And somebody looking at me from the outside would say, wow, she's got it together. 30 years old and a partner in this firm, pretty cool. And I was dying. I was absolutely dying. My whole 20s is just a repetition of the same experience over and over and over. I'm going to work in my little gray flannel suits, and then I'm going out dancing all night in my little, bally cotton dress cut down to there and slit up to there, and, my name's Gretchen, or, or whatever I decided it was that night. The phone would ring at my house, and I didn't know how to answer it because I didn't know what accent to have till I heard who they asked for, And then once they said, "Can I speak to Marie?" I go, "Oh, see," It was tough. It was tough. But I didn't. There again, I didn't know any better. I didn't. And I saw people my age who were settling down and having families and, buying a house and children and cars without dents and, all this kind of stuff. And I didn't know how they did it. I just couldn't get it at all. And finally, what happened was that I started trying to die. I wanted to be dead more than I wanted to be alive, but I wasn't quite brave enough to really do it, so I would get to the edge of it. One of my attempts, I was going to have some surgery on my knee, an arthroscopic surgery, and they said, don't eat or drink anything after midnight. So I stayed up all night with my sister drinking beer. And I show up for the surgery, and they said, when's the last time you ate or drank? And I said, before midnight. And then they couldn't wake me up after the surgery, and they couldn't figure out why, But I had thought that since you weren't supposed to eat or drink, that I might die in this surgery, and then nobody would be mad at me because I wouldn't have committed suicide. I'd just be dead, and it'd be okay. My family wouldn't be as sad if I just died with this surgical accident or whatever. This is the way I thought, as I just didn't have a clue. And my younger sister was supposed to go to treatment because she was having issues with her children having been taken away from her when they caught her driving drunk, or, just these different times and different things would happen, and they took her kids. And my younger sister, who was rescuing her over and over, said, I can't do it again. So I said, well, I can do it. Another right out of the frying pan into the fire, poor little kids. They were 4 and 8 years old. And they came out to live with me here in Miami, where I was living at the time, in Coconut Grove. I chose Coconut Grove, by the way, because you could walk to bars. That's how to choose a home. And they came to live with me, and it kept me from going out to bars as much, so that was good. But, poor little kids. I've got my nephew trained that when it's bedtime, you go to the refrigerator and get a 6-pack and carry it upstairs, and that's how you do bedtime. Well, Aunt Trish drinks 6 beers or something, And by the way, I really, really didn't think a beer at that point is drinking. I thought of that as one of the basic food groups, and that if you drank beer, you didn't need to eat, and it just, and it didn't count. I mean, Jack Daniels counted, beer didn't. So anyway, they were living with me when I started going to AA. And then my sister came and lived with us too, and she didn't quit drinking. But I had to. I just had to. I was going to die. I just was in the depths of the worst place that I could be. They talk about, and if you were in the workshop yesterday, I had this reading from the Last Gaspers. And what's a last gasper? I mean, they think of it as someone who lives on the street. Well, I was the last gasper whether I knew it or not. I mean, when a person wants to be dead more than they want to be alive, and they're beginning to take steps to make that happen, that's pretty last gasp. I really needed sobriety. I really needed a spiritual awakening. I needed a complete renovation to my life. And I found it here. I didn't get it right away. I am not one of those one white chip wonders. My husband is, and Steve is going to be celebrating 45 years on Saturday. Yeah. Pretty darn cool. And we've actually celebrated 32 years of continuous marriage. Woo! And that's tough too. It's good, and I wouldn't trade him for anybody in the world. I actually met him at an intergroup banquet, and he had gone to the banquet to show some newcomer that there's fun in sobriety. And the newcomer is still sober now. He lives up in Maryland, and we met at that dance. And if he hadn't been trying to carry the message, he wouldn't have been there. And my life would have certainly been different. His life would have been different. And our 2 children would have never been born, so their lives would be different, But it was great. When I came to AA, people were so kind and so concerned about me. And when I did drink, the first time I drank was about after 6 weeks of being here. And I went to a business conference. And I was so uncomfortable. I said, I can't do this. I just can't do this. And I decided to drink. It never occurred to me to leave the conference and go home. Duh. So I drank for that weekend, for that week, actually, however many days the conference was. And then I went back to my, at the time, my home group was the downtown group in Miami. And Debbie and I have known each other literally since we both got sober. Amazing. It's so cool to see friends, old friends, from the very first days of sobriety. But I went back to that group, and I remember Debbie and all the people in that group looking at me when I said I had drunk over that weekend, and I thought they were going to pat me on the head and say, well, you did 6 weeks, and that's really good, and it's good. I'm glad you're back, and you can do this. But they were really concerned, like it was a big deal that I had gotten drunk. I was like kind of offended. And I decided I'm going to show them. So I decided I would show them. And I entered into what I call now my competitive phase of sobriety. And I was very aware of who was picking up a 3-month chip and who was picking up a 6-month chip and all that. And I wanted to get ahead. Well, it doesn't work that way. A day at a time means a day at a time for everybody, and the laws of time don't change and bend so that you can get ahead of somebody else. But when my best friend at the time, got drunk, and I was secretly glad. And that is the worst thing I can tell you about me, because to be secretly glad that anybody, anywhere, ever got drunk is horrific. But I didn't know that at the time. That just shows I didn't get it yet, that this is life and death. You know, that we're really gambling with our lives when we drink. And she could have died. And all I was thinking about is who's got more time, you know. But I thank God for her, because what she did after that was she was really aware of how precarious sobriety can be and how precious it is. And, you know, when I got a year of sobriety, I told her, you know, I had picked up my 1-year medallion on the last Saturday in the month of April in 1987. And, you know, I just was like, so where's Prince Charming? You know, where's the parade? Nobody brought me flowers. I don't see any balloons. I mean, you know, come on. What a letdown. How anticlimactic. And I told her that I felt like drinking. And the next day she called me and said, so how did it go last night? And I said, I drank. And so she came over to my house right away, brought me Coca-Cola, the universal cure-all for hangovers in my experience. And then that night she came and picked me up and took me back to that very same meeting that I had picked up the 1-year medallion the Saturday before. And I picked up a white chip. And I was so humiliated. I was so embarrassed. You know what? Never be embarrassed to pick up a white chip. Never be embarrassed to acknowledge where you are. I see so many people try to say, well, I've been around the program for X amount of time. When somebody asks you how long you've been, you know, how long you have or something like that, which we do in AA, we'll say, well, how long do you have? And somebody tells me, well, I've been around since, you know, that's not what we want to know. We want to know, when was your last drink? You know, how are you doing on this road to sobriety? What do you need? How can I help? And we're not asking out of, you know, prurient interest or to be cruel or to put you on the spot. We really want to know. And we want to know people's stories. You know, I'm always interested in hearing other people's stories and knowing what happened to them and how they got to be where they are. I feel like if I don't tell you where I came from, how can you see what a miracle it is where I am now? You know, some people say, oh, I don't want to hear the story. I want to hear recovery. And I want to hear recovery too. I do. But the stories set it up, you know, that it makes it obvious that we are walking miracles. That I'm not drinking is astounding to me. You know, to have not had a drink in 34 years is astounding. And I didn't come here to do that. I came here to fix me so I wouldn't kill myself and that I could live with myself and have a shot at something else, but I didn't know what that was. And what I found as I worked the steps and I really became the person I was meant to be, that I did have that profound personality change. And I got to become the person I always meant to be, should have been, could have been. And she's pretty okay, you know. Not perfect, far from it, but okay enough. And I went on in my career, and like I said, I met Steve, we got married, we had 2 children. I was doing really well professionally, and I was hired to go up and head up a group at another company away from Florida, so we moved to Richmond, Virginia. And then I got another opportunity and had even greater responsibilities and more stuff added. And I'm with this company, and I'm the head of litigation with them in St. Louis, Missouri. And yay. And, you know, it was a huge brokerage firm. I mean, it was like, you know, huge, major name. And I look, again, like everything, the best thing since sliced toast, right? You know, sliced bread. I'm doing great. I'm wonderful. But I wasn't. What happened to me around the time I was 25 years sober, it felt like everything fell apart. Everything in my life fell apart. You know, at work, I can remember walking into the office, and there were these 3 different executives, and it was like every one of them kind of looked at me as being the other person's person. So I'm this pawn to crush to get at this other person. and it just, it's ugly. Corporate politics can be very, very ugly, and my life was just wretched with that going on. And then at the same time, our dear son started his journey towards our fellowship. So I was watching that going on, and I never knew when I came home. I was so afraid to go back to his room because I just knew one day I was going to walk in there and I was going to find him hanging, because there were so many suicides among young people at that time in St. Louis. It was like this epidemic, and he was so obviously distressed and disturbed, and I didn't know what was going on, but I knew it was a dangerous time, and I really thought I was going to find him dead one day. And in my mind, I started to think this way: well, if he kills himself, I can kill myself, and people will understand why I did it. So, that was how I was like living with the threat of his suicide. Good God. We did get him into help, and he is a member of our fellowship today. Yay. Yeah. Which is wonderful. He's going to be 30 next month, and he's a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous and doing great in his life and doing well in his career. And what a joy. I used to hear speakers who would talk about their kids being in the program, and I never got it. Like, you're happy your kid's in the program? Well, damn, yeah. Excuse me, I know, but yeah, it's so much better than having them out there. And Thank you, everyone who shows up and makes sure that this program stays as it is for the next generation, because I know I have a responsibility to your kids and your grandkids to make sure AA is still here, and it's here the way that it works. That we have a purity of purpose, that we understand what we're doing, and thank God we have our literature. Because if we were relying upon word of mouth, how many times would they have gotten this program screwed up by now? Have you ever played that game Telephone, where people sit in a circle and they whisper, and somebody, starts with one sentence, and by the time it gets to the other end, it's like something completely different than what it started with? And that's what would happen to us, but it doesn't, because we got our literature. And in fact, I got a real opportunity to find out about that when I moved back to South Florida. What happened was that, like I said, I was in this horrible, bleak, terrible time, around 25 years of sobriety, and it was just, I started thinking about killing myself again. I was right back there in that depression, that suicidal depression, and I didn't tell my husband, but I found where he hid the gun, and I found where the bullets were, and I would go in there and I would pick it up, like almost every day. And if I didn't pick it up, I thought about it, and I checked on it to make sure it hadn't been moved and where it was, because periodically he did move it once I did tell him this was going on. He tried to help me. And, it's really hard to live life that way, where you're thinking about every day, am I going to choose to continue to live today or not? And that's where I was again. And I stayed that way for over, close to 2 years. And there was a guy who went to my old meeting in St. Louis who used to he had been really suicidal, and every meeting he talked about it. And it was kind of annoying. The people who talk about the same thing every meeting, no matter what the topic is, they got to tell you the story. And I thought, what a jerk. Every meeting he talks about how he was suicidal, but somebody told him, no matter what, choose life. But you know what? Thank God he said that, because it stuck in my head, and every day I pulled on that. And I remembered him saying, no matter what happens, choose life. It's going to change. It's going to change. And I held on to that when I felt hopeless. I heard someone recently talk about hope being like that little pilot light. It's just this teeny little flame in those old-fashioned, or gas oven, but it's there. And as long as that pilot light is there, there's a way to make it come alive and make the fire come up. And that's what happened ultimately for me. But not until I had left that position. It felt like the biggest failure of my life when I was moved out of being the head of litigation and went back to being just a line attorney. I was going to just leave and go back to my old firm, and they would take me back as a partner and do that kind of thing. But the guy actually asked me if I would consider, if they would open an office for me in Florida, would I stay with the company and still do work for them, because it'd be a lot cheaper to pay me my salary than to pay an hourly to me if I went to a firm. And I thought, that sounds pretty good to me. So I did it. And I moved down here, and I was just in the depths of the bleak depression. And I went to Oakland Park, and I went to that, I started making the coffee. And then the next business meeting, or soon thereafter, they said, we need a general service rep. Well, I stuck up my hand. And general service saved my life. General service got me where I was so folded in with people here, and I really learned about the scope and breadth and beauty of AA. I mean, if you've never had a chance to get in there and do that kind of work and study it at that level, if you ever get the chance, do it. Grab it. It's an amazing experience, and I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. The next meeting, at that same meeting when I went there, first time there as a brand new general service rep, and they said, our literature chairman left, and we need a new literature chairman, and, we're going to have elections next month, and if you're qualified, if you would consider stepping up for this. And, at that meeting, they said, would anybody like to do it? And nobody stood up. And so I told my husband, who had volunteered to be the GSR for his group, too, if nobody steps up next month, I'm going to do it. And so the next month we went back to the general service meeting, and nobody stepped up. And I had told John was the chair at the time, and I told him before the meeting, hey, if nobody steps up, has anybody said they want to do this? Because I didn't want to step on anybody's toes. I was the brand new girl, I didn't know. And he kind of looked at me and he says, well, you're welcome to stand for it if you're qualified. It was cute. So I got up there and I told him about, things I had done. I had been in an intergroup in Miami, and I had been on the board of the AA thing there in St. Louis. And I'd done things over the years, but it was all, great stuff, intergroup, but it's different than general service. I mean, it is. It's wonderful, and what a service. And like I said, if it wasn't for the intergroup banquet, I wouldn't have met my husband. So there you go. But I stood up and became the literature chair. And that was so cool. It was just so cool to be welcomed, and people were happy I did it, and they said great, and people called me and said, if I can help you in any way, let me know. And it was wonderful. And I got involved, and the first thing I did was I got the service manual, and I took it home and I looked at it, and I'm going to get a little bit of show and tell here. Okay, for those of you who don't know, this was the AA service manual. This is what they call the large print manual. And I got a large print because I've had issues with my eyes since I was in my 20s, and I can't read small print. I've got a disease that affects all kinds of weird stuff. So I took this home and I looked at it, and it was like, it's tiny, and this is large. And I came back to the meeting the next month, and I said, this is not large print. And everybody in the meeting went, okay. But you know what was cool? Because of that, I actually got in touch with New York. And then they were having a conference for intergroup down here in Fort Lauderdale. And Greg from New York came to that, the guy who was running publishing at the time. And I sat down with him and I explained the kind of issues I had with seeing. And he listened and he talked. And I told him about how this is false advertising to call this large print. No. It's 12 point, and that, there's not a legal standard for large print, but we did talk about it and how it just wasn't really big enough for people who really are vision impaired. And guess what, guys? As a result of one person taking the initiative and having those kind of conversations, I will show you this. They've changed the publishing standards. And now when you go to buy large print, it's large. Look at this, guys. And I love that, isn't that cool? And how could you not be, get out of suicidal depression when you're doing things like that? I will confess I also went to a psychiatrist, but that was it. It was a real opportunity to know people and be useful and be of service. And that's what I always wanted. I always wanted to be useful and of service and, count, to matter. And I'm so grateful that I got that opportunity. I am so grateful for all the different things and the people who've touched my life, people who've sponsored me over the years, people I've sponsored during the pandemic. When I couldn't go to live meetings, I was going to Zoom meetings. And, in the middle of all that, right during the pandemic, they decided to close that little Florida office they opened for me about 10 years ago. And so I was given the choice of either moving or being displaced. And I chose displacement, which meant I retired. And so now I'm retired. And I thought I was kind of young to retire. But then, Jimmy was talking this morning about how he retired at 41. I will tell you, when I saw Jimmy, I just assumed he was older than me, and then I found out when he gave his birth date that I'm older than him. So anyway, oh dear. Isn't that funny how we get this perception of ourselves, and we look at other people and whatever. Anyway. Jimmy, you look great, by the way, if you're in here. A handsome older man, right? Anyway, I just, I was really grateful to have those opportunities and to get to live this life. I'm grateful beyond words for the husband that I found in AA and the fact that we have made it through 32 years together. It's very cool. I am grateful for everybody I've ever sponsored, everybody who's ever helped me along the way. And, one of the things that happened that was just really precious to me was when my brother was dying of cancer, I was talking to him on the phone and I was going to go see him. And I said, "Is there anything you'd like me to bring from Florida?" And he said, "Would you bring me some boiled peanuts?" And so I was telling my friend Lori, my brother wants some boiled peanuts, and it's not boiled peanut season. And she had a friend who was in the business of packaging boiled peanuts. Is that so cool? And arranged for it so that I could bring my dying brother boiled peanuts. It was so cool. It was so cool. And that wouldn't, I know it sounds like it's a small thing, but it's like that happens in AA. That's the kind of thing and the kind of friends we have. The ones who hear when something's important that might not be important to somebody else, and understand where you are and reach you where you are. And I am grateful beyond words for the ups and the downs and the life I've lived and getting through it. When people in AA say they're going to pray for you, you know what? They pray. And you feel it. And I've been through times where people have said, "I'm praying for you," and I felt it. And I'm just going to leave you with one last thing, which I also brought with me. I know too many books, but I can't help it. I'm a book person. But this is in the 12 and 12, and I love it so much. This is in step 11. And the paragraph before is talking about prayer. And it says, "We discover that we do receive guidance for our lives to just about the extent that we stop making demands upon God to give it to us on order and on our terms. Almost any experienced AA, that's me, will tell how his affairs have taken remarkable and unexpected turns for the better as he tried to improve his conscious contact with God. He will also report that out of every season of grief or suffering, when the hand of God seemed heavy or even unjust, new lessons for living were learned, new resources of courage were uncovered, and that finally, inescapably, the conviction came that God does move in a mysterious way his wonders to perform." Thank you.